Books worth hearing. Roy Mills, The Soul's Remembrance. Earth is not our home. Chapter 4, Earthbound. After the age of 2, I became more earthbound in my thinking. And though I still experienced moments of remembrance as I did when Addie had tried to give me away, my recollections of heaven became more vague as time went on. My angel guide no longer spoke to me as regularly, and I began to think of myself more as a human being, a creature of flesh and blood, instead of spirit. My ability to know events before they happened also began to fade during my childhood, until it all but disappeared by the time I turned 10. I didn't experience the forgetfulness that most people do. I still had my heavenly memories, and from time to time God would get my attention in various ways. But the longer I was away from heaven, the more interested I became in my earthly life. It was hard not to give most of my attention to it, because, in many ways, it was a difficult life. The farmhouse we lived in was old. It didn't have electricity or indoor plumbing. We had to pump water from an old hand pump out by the windmill in the corner of the yard and carry it back to the house in buckets. During the winter, that 75-foot walk back to the house was a long, cold haul. And it was so cold inside the house that at times the water wound up freezing in the buckets. Even with a wood stove and a fireplace, the house was hard to heat. There were so many cracks in the floor, I could look down and actually see the chickens under the house. And at night, I could look through the holes in the roof and see stars in the sky. Mama. I never stopped calling Grandmama my mama after Eddie left. Used to put an old rug down over the cracks to stop some of the cold from getting inside. But on windy days, the old rug just flopped up, letting the cold inside. Mama finally nailed it down. When spring would come, Mama had a whole new set of problems. Because of all of the cracks in the walls and floor, the March winds blew dirt and sand into the house. Mama tried to keep things covered, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't keep the dirt from coming in. It seemed like it was everywhere, even in our food. When I complained about it, my granddaddy, whom I called Daddy, just smiled and said, "Don't mind the dirt, it'll help you grow." It wasn't until the winds finally died down later in the spring that Mama was able to get the house back in order and serve us meals that didn't taste gritty. Until Addie abandoned me and moved out, there were 9 of us living in the house. My grandparents, me, my mother, and her 5 brothers and sisters who were all younger than her. Even after my mother and one of her sisters left, it was still crowded. My daddy was sick much of the time, and eventually he got too sick to work. My oldest uncle, who was only 17, had to quit school and go to work to help support the rest of us. At the time, the only available work was farm labor, and my uncle only made $3 a day for working from sunrise to sunset. That came to $15 a week if it didn't rain. All we had to live on was my uncle's pay and whatever Daddy could get for the eggs and chickens laid. For the eggs our chickens laid. I think it was hard sometimes for Daddy to have his son supporting the family, but we got by from day to day by the grace of God. Mama made clothes for me out of old flour sacks. Most of them were okay, but the flour sack underwear just about killed me. They rubbed me in all the wrong places. A lot of my clothes were hand-me-downs that were covered with patches by the time I got them. My shoes were usually hand-me-downs too, and I had to stuff them with paper to make them stay on because they were always too big. When I did get a new pair of shoes, usually cotton sneakers, I had to take real good care of them because they had to last for a year. So I saved my shoes for school and church and went barefoot the rest of the time, even through much of the winter. If I wore holes in the shoes before Daddy could afford to buy another pair, he stuffed cardboard inside of them. That worked fine unless it was raining. The cardboard just soaked up the water like a sponge, and my feet would stay wet all day long. Mom and Daddy always managed to put something on the table, even if it was only cornbread and biscuits. And when my uncles brought back something from hunting or fishing, we had meat or fish. But I was always hungry, and I felt there was never enough food. Maybe it just seemed that way because I was a growing boy with a big appetite, but I didn't complain. One day, when I was about 5 or 6 years old, Daddy got a turkey, and he asked me to help him kill it. I had never seen anyone cut off a turkey's head before, and I was a curious boy, so I was glad to help. He laid the turkey across the top of a chopping block, tied its head to one end, and told me to hold tight to its feet. I did as I was told. I pulled so hard on the big bird's feet that I'm surprised his head didn't pop off. When the turkey was secure, Daddy raised the axe and cut off its head. I was still pulling so hard that I went flying backwards and landed on the ground, never letting go of the turkey. Its wings were flapping like crazy, beating against me, and its blood was everywhere, including all over me. I yelled and let loose of the turkey, scrambling away. Somehow the turkey got to its feet and ran right under the house. I'd never seen anything like that before. It was the worst thing I'd ever been a part of, and it was the worst thing that ever happened to that turkey too. I was so scared that I started to cry, but Daddy acted like it was no big deal. When the turkey failed to come out from under the other side of the house, Daddy looked at me and said, "Well, boy, you have to go get that crazy turkey." That was the last thing I wanted to do, because I was thinking about all the things that headless bird might do to me if I crawled under there with him while he was dying. But someone had to bring out our dinner, and since I was the smallest, I could get under the house the easiest. So I grabbed the axe and reluctantly crawled under the house to retrieve the turkey. I think Daddy laughed more that day than I had seen him laugh. Even though I didn't enjoy crawling under our house after a headless turkey, it was good to hear Daddy laugh because so much of the time he was sick. And being ill as he was, he and I didn't get the chance very often to do things together. It worked out all right, though, because along the way I found another good friend to share my time with. When I was 6 years old, I got a very special dog, which was half boxer. We named him Boos, because as a child I had a problem with my speech, and his original name, Butch, came out of my mouth sounding like Boosh. So, for short, we all began to call him Boos. He became one of my closest companions. Boos and I fell in love at first sight when he was just a puppy, and from that point on, he was by my side almost everywhere I went. Everyone in the family loved Boos, and we still talk about him to this day, even though he died over 30 years ago. One day in late summer a few years later, I was out near the dirt road in front of our house. It was almost sunset. Boos had been off somewhere, probably chasing rabbits or taking a nap. When twilight came, I saw him trotting down the road toward me. He was acting kind of strange, and he wedged himself between my feet the same way he used to do when he was a puppy. Boos was a big dog, at least 50 pounds, and after he nearly knocked me off my feet, I sat down with him at the side of the road. While he rested his head on my leg, I petted him and rubbed his nose, wondering why he was acting so strangely. A few minutes later, he sat up and looked me straight in the eyes, and I suddenly knew he was saying goodbye. It was as though we were communicating spirit to spirit. The thought of Boos leaving hurt me deeply. Because he was such a good friend, I started crying, and I gathered him in my arms and held him real tight. I considered tying him up to keep him with me, but I heard the familiar heavenly voice of my angel guide. "Let him go," she said in a soft, sweet voice. "He needs his freedom now." After holding Boos a while longer, I gave him one last hug and forced myself to let him go. I was hoping with all my heart that he would not leave, but after looking at me and wagging his tail, he turned and slowly started walking up the road. After he had gone a few hundred yards or so, I called out, "Boos, come here." For the first time ever, he paid me no attention and kept on going. I called out to him again, more demandingly this time. He turned around and looked, but kept on going. He went another 100 yards or so up the road, stopped, and looked back at me one last time. He wagged his tail, turned around, began slowly trotting up the road again. I never saw Boos again. A week later, I heard that someone had found him dead. It really hurt to lose him. He'd been such a good friend and loving companion, and we had spent many happy hours together running and playing in the fields and swamps. But I was comforted by the knowledge that my loss was only temporary, that Boos and I would be together again one day, romping to our heart's content through the fields of heaven. Even though life was hard, there were a lot of moments like the turkey incident that brought laughter, and companions like Boos that offered friendship. Being poor taught us to appreciate the truly important things in life, family and friends, working together as a team, and trusting in God. We didn't have a television until after I was 10 years old, and as it worked out, it was a blessing not to have one. Instead of watching TV, I was always busy helping with chores, or fishing and hunting down in the swamp. At night, when the work was done, all of us gathered on our front porch or on our neighbor's porch and entertained each other. These were wonderful times, a gentle breeze blowing through the trees and the moon peeking out through tree limbs overhead. The older folks told us stories of their childhood or family history. Sometimes they told funny stories or tales about haunted swamps and ghosts that made the hair stand up on my neck. At other times, the children played hide and seek or caught fireflies. And when we were feeling particularly ornery, we dressed up in Mama's big old overcoat and bonnet and ran around the yard scaring the dogs. There was never a dull moment when we all got together. And because we didn't have a television, I got to spend a lot of time getting to know my family. We may not have had any luxuries to speak of, but we were content and happy just the same and had a great deal of love for each other. Still, the hard work of living such a life caused me to gradually become more earthbound. All in all, I wouldn't trade my life back then for any other in the world. And I know this was God's intention, that I grow to appreciate the heavenly values of love and togetherness through the difficulties of my life on earth. Chapter 4, Earthbound, the end.